Sarah Williams never imagined her Tuesday morning would start with a phone call that would change everything. As a public defender in downtown Detroit, she was used to difficult cases, but the voice on the other end of the line made her pause. "Ms. Williams, we need you at the courthouse immediately. There's been an incident, and you're the only attorney available who speaks Spanish fluently," her supervisor explained hurriedly. Sarah grabbed her briefcase and rushed through the busy streets of Detroit. At 28 years old, she had already built a reputation as a fierce defender of the underdog. Growing up in the inner city herself, she understood what it meant to be judged before anyone got to know the real person underneath. The courthouse was buzzing with unusual activity when she arrived. Police officers stood in clusters whispering among themselves, while reporters gathered outside like vultures waiting for fresh news. Sarah pushed through the crowd and made her way to the holding area. "What exactly am I dealing with here?" she asked Officer Martinez, whom she had worked with on several cases before. "It's complicated," he said, shaking his head. "We've got Marcus Rodriguez in custody. Goes by Tank with his crew. Full member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. Big guy, lots of tattoos, the whole intimidating package. But here's the weird part. He's refusing to talk to anyone except through a Spanish interpreter. And he specifically asked for a black female attorney." Sarah raised her eyebrows. In her 5 years as a public defender, she had never encountered such a specific request, especially from someone in a motorcycle gang. The Hells Angels weren't exactly known for their diversity or progressive thinking. "What are the charges?" she asked, pulling out her notepad. "Aggravated assault, destruction of property, and disturbing the peace. But the witnesses are giving conflicting stories. Some say he started a fight at Murphy's bar last night. Others say he was trying to break up a fight. The owner wants to press full charges, but 2 of the other patrons are saying the whole thing is being blown out of proportion." Sarah nodded, mentally preparing herself for what was sure to be an interesting case. She had defended gang members before, but never someone from the Hells Angels. The motorcycle club had a reputation for being tough, loyal to each other, and deeply suspicious of outsiders, especially law enforcement and anyone connected to the legal system. When she entered the small interview room, she was surprised by what she saw. Marcus Rodriguez was indeed a large man, probably 6 feet 4 inches tall with arms covered in intricate tattoos, but his eyes held a sadness that didn't match his intimidating appearance. He sat quietly, his hands folded on the metal table, looking more like a lost child than a dangerous criminal. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Sarah Williams, your court-appointed attorney," she began in Spanish, watching his face for any reaction. His eyes lit up immediately and he sat up straighter. "You speak Spanish perfectly. Where did you learn?" "I grew up in a neighborhood where it was necessary," Sarah replied honestly. "Now let's talk about what happened last night. I need you to tell me everything, and I mean everything. Don't leave out any details, even if you think they make you look bad." Marcus took a deep breath and began his story. "I wasn't supposed to be at Murphy's bar. My club brothers don't usually go there, it's not our kind of place. Too fancy, too many college kids. But my little sister Rosa works there as a waitress, and she called me crying." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. This wasn't the beginning she had expected. Rosa is only 19, just started college. She's the first person in our family to go to university, and I'm so proud of her. But last night, these 3 guys, looked like college kids but older, maybe graduate students, they wouldn't leave her alone. Every time she served their table, one of them would grab her arm or make disgusting comments. She asked them to stop, but they just laughed. Marcus's hands clenched into fists as he continued. "She called me because her manager wasn't doing anything about it. Said they were good customers and she needed to learn to handle difficult people. Can you believe that? My little sister being told to just accept being harassed because these guys spend money at the bar?" Sarah could feel the anger radiating from Marcus, but it wasn't the random violence she had expected. This was protective anger. Family loyalty taken to an extreme. "So you went to the bar to confront these men?" Sarah asked. "I went to talk to them, yes. I'm not stupid, Ms. Williams. I know what people think when they see me walk into a place. The tattoos, the leather jacket, the motorcycle club colors, I know I look scary. Usually that's enough. People see me coming and they back down from whatever trouble they're causing. But not this time." Marcus shook his head. "These 3 guys, they thought it was funny. When I walked up to their table and politely asked them to leave my sister alone, they started making jokes about bikers and asking if I was there to start trouble. One of them, Tall guy with blonde hair. He stood up and pushed me. Sarah made notes as Marcus continued his story. She could already see the complications this case would present. Self-defense laws were tricky, especially when the defendant was a member of a motorcycle club that many people automatically assumed was violent. What happened after he pushed you? I stepped back and tried to calm the situation down. I told them I didn't want any trouble, just wanted them to respect my sister and other women working at the bar. But then the blonde guy said something about Rosa that I won't repeat to a lady like you, something disgusting and disrespectful about what he wanted to do to her. Marcus's voice grew quiet, and Sarah could see the pain in his eyes. I lost my temper, Ms. Williams. I'm not proud of it, but I couldn't let anyone talk about my sister like that. I pushed him back and he fell against a table. That table hit another table and glasses started breaking. The whole thing escalated from there. Sarah studied his face carefully. In her experience, most clients tried to minimize their involvement in whatever had happened. Marcus seemed to be taking full responsibility, which was either very honest or very stupid. Mr. Rodriguez, I have to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has your motorcycle club told you to say anything specific about this incident? Are they influencing your story in any way? Marcus looked surprised by the question. No, ma'am. My club brothers don't even know I'm here yet. This happened because I was protecting my family, not because of anything related to the Hells Angels. This is personal. As their first meeting concluded, Sarah found herself more intrigued than she had expected to be. Marcus Rodriguez didn't fit the stereotypical image of a Hells Angels member, and his case was far more complex than a simple bar fight. She could already tell that defending him was going to challenge everything she thought she knew about motorcycle clubs, family loyalty, and the complicated nature of justice in America. Walking out of the courthouse that afternoon, Sarah had no idea that her decision to take this case seriously would set in motion events that would not only change her life, but also challenge an entire community's understanding of prejudice, loyalty, and what it really means to stand up for what's right. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her office early to prepare for Marcus's case. She had spent most of the previous evening researching Hells Angels legal precedents and thinking about the best defense strategy. As she settled at her desk with her coffee, her assistant knocked on the door. Sarah, there are some people here to see you. They don't have an appointment, but they say it's about the Rodriguez case. Sarah looked up from her files, curious. Send them in. She expected to see Marcus's family members or maybe his girlfriend. Instead, 5 large men in leather jackets walked into her small office. Each wore the distinctive Hells Angels patches, and their presence immediately filled the room with tension. The leader, a man with graying hair and intelligent eyes, stepped forward. Ms. Williams, I'm James Bear Thompson, president of the Detroit chapter. We need to talk about Tank, Marcus Rodriguez. Sarah gestured for them to sit, though there weren't enough chairs. 3 of the men remained standing while Bear and another member sat down. She had never been this close to actual Hells Angels members before, and she was surprised by how respectful they seemed. How can I help you? Sarah asked, maintaining her professional demeanor despite feeling slightly intimidated. First, we want to make sure you understand something, Bear said seriously. What happened at Murphy's bar had nothing to do with club business. Marcus was there as a brother protecting his sister, not as a Hells Angel enforcing territory or causing trouble. One of the younger members, who introduced himself as Tommy, spoke up. We heard about the charges and we know how this looks. Big scary biker beats up college kids at a bar. The media's gonna eat this up and make Marcus look like a monster. Sarah nodded. I'm aware of the challenges we're facing. The public perception of motorcycle clubs doesn't help matters. That's exactly why we're here, Bear continued. Marcus is a good man. He's been with our club for 3 years, and in all that time, he's never started trouble. He works 40 hours a week at the auto plant, sends money to his mother in Mexico, and he's putting his sister through college. The only reason he joined our club was for protection after his family received some threats from a local gang. This information surprised Sarah. It painted a very different picture from what she had expected. What kind of threats? She asked. Tommy answered. Marcus's father was a witness in a murder trial 2 years ago. He saw a gang member shoot an innocent kid during a drive-by. When he testified, the gang started threatening the whole family. Marcus couldn't afford private security, and the police said they couldn't provide protection indefinitely. Bear picked up the story. Marcus heard about our reputation for protecting our own, so he approached us. We don't usually take in people who aren't already part of the motorcycle community, but his situation was different. The man was desperate to protect his family. Sarah took notes as she listened. This background information could be crucial for the case, but she needed to verify everything independently. Can you provide me with documentation about these threats? Police reports, court records from the murder trial? Already ahead of you, Bear said, pulling out a folder. Copies of everything. Police reports, court transcripts, even photos of graffiti they sprayed on the family's house. Marcus's father, Eduardo Rodriguez, was a key witness in the conviction of Carlos Martinez for first-degree murder. Sarah reviewed the documents quickly. Everything appeared legitimate, and it completely changed her understanding of Marcus's situation. He wasn't a career criminal or someone who enjoyed violence. He was a family man who had joined a motorcycle club out of desperation. "There's something else you should know," said Pete, one of the older members who had been quiet until now. "The three guys Marcus had the altercation with, they're not random college students. We did some checking of our own." Sarah looked up sharply. "What did you find?" "The main one, the blonde guy who pushed Marcus first. His name is Bradley Morrison. His father is Judge Robert Morrison, and his uncle is District Attorney Patrick Morrison. This whole thing might not be as simple as it looks." The implications hit Sarah immediately. If the son of a prominent judge and nephew of the district attorney was involved, the case could become much more complicated. There might be pressure to prosecute Marcus to the fullest extent of the law, regardless of the actual facts. "Are you suggesting this might be politically motivated?" Sarah asked. Bear shrugged. "I'm saying that rich, connected kids don't usually face consequences when they harass working-class girls. But when someone like Marcus stands up to them, suddenly the full weight of the legal system comes down on him." Sarah spent the next hour reviewing all the documents the Hells Angels had brought. She was impressed by their thoroughness and attention to detail. These weren't the mindless criminals she had expected, but rather organized men who clearly cared about protecting one of their own. "I have to ask," Sarah said finally. "Why are you sharing all this information with me? Most motorcycle clubs aren't known for cooperating with attorneys or law enforcement." Bear smiled for the first time since entering her office. "Because Marcus specifically requested you. He said you treated him with respect yesterday, spoke his language, and didn't judge him based on his appearance. In our world, respect and loyalty mean everything. If Marcus trusts you, then we trust you," Tommy added. "Plus, we did our research on you too. You've got a reputation for fighting hard for clients that other attorneys give up on. You defend people that the system wants to throw away. That's exactly what Marcus needs right now." As the meeting concluded, Bear stood up and extended his hand to Sarah. "Ms. Williams, we're not asking you to do anything illegal or unethical. We just want Marcus to get a fair trial, which seems to be increasingly rare for people like us. We'll support you in whatever way we legally can." After the Hells Angels left, Sarah sat alone in her office, processing everything she had learned. The case was becoming more complex by the hour, and she could sense that there were still secrets to be uncovered. Around noon, her phone rang. It was Marcus calling from jail. "Ms. Williams, I heard my brothers came to see you. I hope they didn't intimidate you or say anything inappropriate." "Actually, they were very helpful and professional. But Marcus, you didn't tell me yesterday about the threats against your family or the connection to the murder trial." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want you to think I was making excuses or trying to gain sympathy. What happened at Murphy's Bar was about protecting Rosa, not about my past or my club affiliation. I understand, but this background information could be very important for your defense. It shows that you joined the Hells Angels for protection, not because you wanted to be involved in criminal activity." "Ms. Williams," Marcus said seriously, "there's something else I need to tell you. Last night after you left, I got a visit from someone unexpected. One of the guards brought me a message from the district attorney's office. They want to offer me a plea deal." Sarah was surprised. Plea deals usually didn't come this early in a case, especially for relatively minor charges like the ones Marcus was facing. "What kind of plea deal?" "They want me to plead guilty to aggravated assault, serve 6 months in county jail, and agree to stay away from Murphy's Bar permanently. In exchange, they'll drop the other charges." Sarah frowned. Something didn't feel right about this offer. 6 months seemed excessive for what was essentially a bar fight, especially considering Marcus's clean record and the provocation he had faced. "Marcus, don't agree to anything without discussing it with me first. I want to investigate this case more thoroughly before we make any decisions." That's what I told them, Marcus replied. But they said the offer is only good for 24 hours. They want an answer by tomorrow morning. As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that the pressure she had anticipated was already beginning. Someone wanted this case resolved quickly and quietly, which made her more determined than ever to fight for Marcus's rights. She spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls and gathering information. By evening, she had a much clearer picture of what had really happened at Murphy's bar, and she was beginning to suspect that Marcus Rodriguez was being set up for reasons that had nothing to do with justice. Sarah worked late into the evening, making phone calls and reviewing security footage from Murphy's bar. The bar's owner, Kevin Murphy, had initially been reluctant to share the footage with her, but after some persuasion, he agreed to let her view it at his establishment after closing time. The footage told a very different story from the police reports. Sarah watched the timestamp as Marcus entered the bar at 9:47 p.m., clearly looking around for his sister Rosa. The camera showed Rosa serving the table of 3 young men, and even from the grainy security footage, Sarah could see how uncomfortable the young woman looked. One of the men, who matched the description of Bradley Morrison, kept grabbing Rosa's wrist every time she tried to move away from their table. At 9:52 p.m., Marcus approached the table. The footage showed him speaking calmly to the 3 men for nearly 3 minutes. Sarah could see that his body language was non-threatening. His hands were visible and he maintained a respectful distance. Then everything changed. Bradley Morrison stood up abruptly and shoved Marcus hard enough that he stumbled backward. Marcus recovered his balance and appeared to be trying to de-escalate the situation, holding up his hands in a peaceful gesture. The cameras captured the moment when Bradley leaned forward and said something to Marcus that made the large man's entire demeanor shift. Whatever was said, it triggered an immediate and violent reaction. Marcus pushed Bradley, who fell backward into a table, causing a domino effect that brought down 2 more tables and sent glasses crashing to the floor. What happened next was the most important part. The other 2 men at the table immediately began throwing punches at Marcus, while Bradley got up and grabbed a beer bottle, clearly intending to use it as a weapon. Marcus was defending himself against 3 attackers, not starting a fight. The most damning evidence came at the end of the footage. After the fight was broken up by other patrons and before the police arrived, Sarah watched Bradley and his friends have what appeared to be a quick conference. They were clearly coordinating their stories, and Bradley made a phone call that lasted exactly 47 seconds. Sarah made copies of the relevant footage and left Murphy's bar with a much clearer understanding of what had really happened. Marcus had been telling the truth, and the 3 college students had deliberately provoked him into a fight. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her office to find a surprise visitor waiting for her. A well-dressed woman in her 50s sat in the reception area, looking nervous but determined. "Ms. Williams, my name is Patricia Morrison. I believe you're representing the man who had an altercation with my son Bradley." Sarah was immediately alert. This was the mother of one of the alleged victims, which made this conversation potentially problematic from an ethical standpoint. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm not sure we should be speaking without your attorney present, especially since your son is a witness in this case." "Please," Patricia said, standing up urgently. "I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm here as a mother who's concerned about what really happened that night." Against her better judgment, Sarah invited Patricia into her office. The woman seemed genuinely distressed, not like someone trying to interfere with the case. "Mrs. Morrison, anything you tell me could potentially be used in court. Are you sure you want to have this conversation?" Patricia nodded firmly. "My son is lying about what happened at Murphy's bar, and I think an innocent man is going to prison because of it." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued but cautious. "What makes you think your son is lying?" "Because I know my son, Ms. Williams. Bradley has always had a problem with anger and entitlement. He's been in trouble before for harassing women, but his father and uncle have always managed to make the problems disappear." Patricia opened her purse and pulled out a piece of paper. 2 years ago, Bradley was accused of sexual assault by a girl at his university. The charges were mysteriously dropped after my husband spoke with some colleagues. Last year he was arrested for drunk driving, but somehow the test results got lost and the case was dismissed. Sarah examined the document Patricia had given her. It was a printout of text messages between Bradley and his friends from the night of the bar incident. The messages were damaging to Bradley's credibility. In them, he bragged about teaching some biker scum a lesson and mentioned that his uncle would make sure the animal gets what he deserves. Most importantly, there was a message sent 20 minutes before Marcus arrived at the bar. Let's mess with the hot Mexican waitress and see what happens. Bet she has a boyfriend who thinks he's tough. Mrs. Morrison, why are you showing me these messages? This could seriously damage your son's case. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Because what my son did was wrong, and I'm tired of watching him hurt people without consequences. That young man, Marcus, he was just protecting his sister. Any brother would have done the same thing. She wiped her eyes and continued. I've been married to a judge for 26 years, Ms. Williams. I've watched my husband send good people to prison while letting his friends' and colleagues' children walk free. I won't be part of sending an innocent man to jail just because my son is a privileged brat who thinks the world owes him something. Sarah was stunned by Patricia's honesty and bravery. Testifying against her own son would take incredible courage, especially given her husband's position in the legal community. Are you willing to testify about this in court? Sarah asked. If necessary, yes, but there might be another way. Patricia reached into her purse again and pulled out a small recording device. I recorded a conversation with Bradley last night. He admitted what really happened and explained how he plans to manipulate his testimony to make your client look like the aggressor. Sarah listened to the recording with growing amazement. Bradley's voice was clear as he described his plan to portray Marcus as a violent criminal who attacked them without provocation. He also mentioned that his uncle, the district attorney, had already assured him that Marcus would be prosecuted aggressively as an example to other motorcycle gang members. Mrs. Morrison, this recording changes everything. But you realize that this will likely destroy your relationship with your son and possibly your husband? Patricia nodded sadly. My marriage has been difficult for years, Ms. Williams. My husband cares more about his political career than about doing what's right. And my son? I love him, but I refuse to enable his behavior anymore. Maybe facing real consequences will finally help him become a better person. As Patricia prepared to leave, she turned back to Sarah with a final piece of information. There's something else you should know. The district attorney's office isn't just rushing this case because Bradley is involved. My brother-in-law Patrick has been under investigation by the FBI for corruption. Prosecuting a high-profile motorcycle gang member would generate positive publicity and distract from his legal problems. Your client is being used as a political pawn. After Patricia left, Sarah immediately called Marcus to share the developments. Ms. Williams, I can't believe it, Marcus said when she explained what she had learned. This whole thing was planned from the beginning? It appears so. They targeted your sister specifically because they knew you would come to protect her. They wanted to provoke a fight with a Hells Angels member to create a case that would make the district attorney look tough on organized crime. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What do we do now? Now we fight back, Sarah replied firmly. I'm going to file motions to dismiss all charges based on prosecutorial misconduct. We have evidence of a conspiracy to frame you, and we have a witness willing to testify about the real events. But won't this put Mrs. Morrison in danger? I mean, she's going against her own family to help me. That takes serious courage. Sarah smiled, impressed once again by Marcus's character. Even facing false charges and potential prison time, he was worried about someone else's welfare. Mrs. Morrison knows the risks, and she's prepared to face them. Sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrifice. As Sarah prepared for the next day's court hearing, she had no idea that the events she was setting in motion would not only vindicate Marcus Rodriguez, but would also expose a web of corruption that reached to the highest levels of the local legal system. The shocking revelation that would come the next day would change everything, not just for Marcus, but for everyone involved in the case. The next morning arrived with unexpected chaos. Sarah was preparing for Marcus's hearing when her phone started ringing continuously. First it was her supervisor, then reporters, then people she had never heard of asking for comments about the Rodriguez case breakthrough. Sarah, you need to get to the courthouse immediately, her supervisor said urgently. Something big has happened, and I mean big. The FBI showed up an hour ago with warrants. Sarah grabbed her files and rushed to the courthouse, her mind racing. As she approached the building, she saw news vans lined up along the street and reporters setting up cameras. Whatever had happened was already making headlines. Inside the courthouse, the scene was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. FBI agents were carrying boxes of documents out of the district attorney's office, while police officers stood guard. Court clerks whispered in small groups, and everyone seemed to be in a state of shock. Sarah found Officer Martinez near the information desk, looking bewildered. "What's going on here?" she asked. "It's crazy, Sarah. About 2 hours ago, the FBI executed search warrants on District Attorney Patrick Morrison's office, his home, and his brother Judge Robert Morrison's chambers. Word is they've been investigating corruption for months, and something that happened yesterday triggered them to make their move." Sarah's heart started racing. Could Patricia Morrison's decision to come forward have somehow accelerated the FBI investigation? "Do you know what specific evidence they found?" Officer Martinez shook his head. "They're not saying much, but I heard from one of the court clerks that it has something to do with case fixing, bribery, and witness intimidation. Apparently, they've been recording phone conversations for weeks." Sarah made her way to the holding area to see Marcus. When she arrived, she found him sitting calmly, reading a book that one of his Hells Angels brothers had brought him. "Ms. Williams, I heard all the commotion upstairs. Does this have anything to do with my case?" "I think it might have everything to do with your case," Sarah replied, pulling up a chair. "Marcus, yesterday evening, Mrs. Morrison came to see me with evidence that her son was lying about what happened at Murphy's bar. She also mentioned that the district attorney was under FBI investigation for corruption." Marcus set down his book, his full attention now focused on Sarah. "And you think her coming forward somehow triggered all this FBI activity?" "It's possible. Sometimes one person's courage to speak the truth can bring down an entire system of corruption." Before Marcus could respond, a guard approached their table. "Ms. Williams, Agent Johnson from the FBI would like to speak with you about the Rodriguez case." Sarah followed the guard to a small conference room where a professional-looking woman in her 40s waited with a stack of files. "Ms. Williams, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Johnson. I've been leading an investigation into corruption in the local prosecutor's office, and your client's case has become central to our inquiry." Sarah sat down cautiously. "How can I help you?" Agent Johnson opened one of her files. "Yesterday, we received a call from Patricia Morrison. She informed us that her son Bradley had been involved in deliberately provoking an altercation with your client, and that District Attorney Morrison was planning to prosecute the case aggressively for political reasons." "Mrs. Morrison contacted the FBI directly?" "Yes. She brought us recordings of conversations with her son and copies of text messages that prove the incident at Murphy's bar was premeditated. She also provided information about other cases where her husband and brother-in-law manipulated the legal system to protect wealthy defendants while aggressively prosecuting working-class people and minorities." Agent Johnson pulled out a transcript and placed it on the table. "But that's not the most shocking part. When we executed our search warrants this morning, we found evidence of a much larger conspiracy." Sarah leaned forward, eager to hear more. "District Attorney Morrison has been taking bribes from various sources for over 3 years. In exchange for money and political support, he has been dismissing charges against certain defendants, reducing sentences for others, and aggressively prosecuting cases that would generate positive publicity for his career." Agent Johnson flipped through several pages. "Your client's case was particularly valuable to Morrison because it allowed him to appear tough on organized crime while also deflecting attention from our investigation. He planned to hold a press conference after securing a conviction, announcing a new initiative to crack down on motorcycle gangs. So, Marcus was specifically targeted because he's a Hells Angels member?" "Exactly. Morrison needed a high-profile case involving organized crime, so when his nephew Bradley told him about the incident at Murphy's bar, he saw an opportunity. Bradley was instructed to exaggerate his injuries and claim that your client made threats related to gang activity." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. How many other innocent people has he done this to? Agent Johnson's expression grew grim. "We've identified at least 15 cases over the past 2 years where Morrison appears to have manipulated charges for political or financial gain. Some defendants who should have walked free are currently serving prison sentences, while others who committed serious crimes were allowed to plea down to minor offenses. What happens now? District Attorney Morrison and Judge Robert Morrison have both been arrested and charged with conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Bradley Morrison is being charged as an accomplice for his role in framing your client. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. And Marcus's case? All charges against Mr. Rodriguez are being dropped immediately. The evidence clearly shows that he was defending himself and his sister against a planned attack. In fact, Bradley Morrison will likely face charges for assault and filing a false police report. Agent Johnson gathered her files and prepared to leave. Ms. Williams, there's one more thing. Mrs. Morrison's courage in coming forward not only saved your client from wrongful conviction, but also helped us expose a corruption scheme that has been destroying lives for years. She's agreed to testify against her husband and son in exchange for immunity from prosecution. After Agent Johnson left, Sarah returned to the holding area to share the news with Marcus. When she explained what had happened, he was quiet for a long moment. Ms. Williams, I can't believe that one woman's decision to do the right thing brought down this whole conspiracy. Mrs. Morrison could have stayed quiet and let me go to prison, and no one would have questioned it. Sometimes it only takes one person willing to stand up for the truth, Sarah replied. Patricia Morrison risked everything to make sure you got justice. Marcus shook his head in amazement. And to think if her son hadn't targeted my sister, none of this would have come to light. All those other innocent people would still be in prison, and Morrison would still be destroying lives. Within an hour, Marcus was released from custody. As they walked out of the courthouse together, they were met by Bear Thompson and several other Hells Angels members who had come to show their support. Tank, we heard about what happened, Bear said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. The whole thing was a setup from the beginning. Marcus nodded, still processing everything that had occurred. The most incredible part is that it was a judge's wife who exposed the whole scheme. I never would have expected someone from their world to stand up for someone like me. Bear looked thoughtful. Maybe that's the lesson here, brother. You can't judge people based on their appearance or background. Sometimes the most unlikely person turns out to be the hero of the story. As the group prepared to leave, Sarah reflected on the events of the past few days. When she first took Marcus's case, she had expected a simple assault defense. Instead, she had become part of exposing one of the biggest corruption scandals in the city's history. The shocking revelation that a black woman defending a Hells Angels member would lead to the downfall of two of the most powerful men in the legal system was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. But sometimes, Sarah realized, justice comes from the most unexpected places and through the most unlikely alliances. The story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for a legal battle that would reshape how the community understood both the motorcycle culture they had feared and the legal system they had trusted. 3 weeks after the arrests, the story had become national news. Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm she never could have anticipated. News outlets across the country were calling it the Morrison scandal, and Sarah's role as the public defender who helped expose the corruption had made her something of a celebrity. She was sitting in her office, trying to catch up on her other cases when her assistant announced that she had visitors. Send them in, Sarah said, expecting more reporters. Instead, Patricia Morrison walked into her office, accompanied by Rosa Rodriguez, Marcus's sister. Sarah was surprised to see the two women together, especially given everything that had happened. Ms. Williams, I hope you don't mind us coming unannounced, Patricia said. Rosa and I have been talking and we wanted to speak with you about something important. Sarah gestured for them to sit down, curious about what had brought these two women from completely different worlds together. Rosa spoke first, her voice quiet but determined. Ms. Williams, I wanted to thank you for everything you did for my brother. But more than that, I wanted you to know about the conversation Mrs. Morrison and I had yesterday. Patricia nodded encouragingly. Rosa contacted me through the FBI Victim Advocate Program. She wanted to understand why I had come forward to help Marcus, and we ended up having a very long conversation about justice, courage, and what it means to do the right thing. Sarah was intrigued. The idea of these two women connecting was both unexpected and moving. What we discovered, Rosa continued, is that both of our families have been hurt by the same system of corruption, just in different ways. My family was threatened and intimidated, while Mrs. Morrison's family was corrupted by power and privilege. Patricia's eyes were sad as she spoke. My son Bradley has never faced real consequences for his actions. My husband has spent years protecting him and other privileged young men like him, while sending people like Marcus to prison for defending themselves and their families. We've decided to do something about it, Rosa said firmly. We want to start a foundation to help families who have been victimized by corrupt legal practices. People who can't afford good lawyers, people who don't speak English well, people who are automatically assumed to be guilty because of how they look or where they come from. Sarah was impressed by their initiative. That's a wonderful idea, but starting a foundation requires significant resources and legal expertise. Patricia smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. I've been married to a corrupt judge for 20 years, Ms. Williams. I know exactly how the system works and what needs to be changed. As for resources, my husband accumulated quite a bit of wealth through his illegal activities. The FBI is allowing me to keep the legitimate assets, and I want to use them to help the people he hurt. Rosa pulled out a folder and placed it on Sarah's desk. We've already spoken with 12 families who were affected by false prosecutions or dismissed charges. There's Mrs. Chen, whose son was convicted of assault when he was actually the victim of a hate crime. There's Mr. Washington, who spent 2 years in prison because Judge Morrison refused to allow key evidence that would have proven his innocence. Sarah reviewed the list of names and cases. Each represented a life that had been destroyed or damaged by the Morrison corruption scheme. We want to offer legal representation to help these families appeal their wrongful convictions, Patricia explained. We also want to lobby for changes in how cases are assigned to judges and prosecutors to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. And we want you to be our legal director, Rosa added. You're the only attorney who has seen this corruption up close and successfully fought against it. You understand both the legal system and what it's like to represent people who don't have power or privilege. Sarah was overwhelmed by their offer. Running a foundation would mean giving up her current job and taking on an enormous responsibility. I'm honored that you would consider me, but this is a huge undertaking. Are you sure you want to move forward with this? Patricia nodded without hesitation. Ms. Williams, 3 weeks ago I thought I was trapped in a life of compromise and silence. My husband controlled everything. Our finances, our social life, our family's reputation. I convinced myself that I had no choice but to go along with his corruption. She paused, collecting her thoughts. But watching you fight for Marcus, seeing you refuse to back down even when you were facing powerful people who wanted you to fail, that showed me what real courage looks like. You didn't have any personal stake in Marcus's case, but you fought for him like he was family. Rosa reached over and took Patricia's hand in a gesture of solidarity that would have been impossible to imagine just a month earlier. Mrs. Morrison and I come from very different backgrounds, Rosa said, but we both learned the same lesson from watching you work. Justice isn't something that happens automatically. It requires people who are willing to fight for it, even when the odds are against them. Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on her office door. Marcus entered, followed by Bear Thompson and Agent Johnson. Sorry to interrupt, Marcus said, but Agent Johnson has some news about the investigation that affects everyone in this room. Agent Johnson sat down and opened a file folder. The Morrison investigation has expanded significantly. We've now identified 37 cases over the past 5 years where either District Attorney Morrison or Judge Morrison appears to have manipulated the legal system for personal or political gain. She pulled out several documents. We've also discovered that their corruption was part of a larger network involving 3 other judges, 2 prosecutors, and several defense attorneys who were working together to fix cases based on bribes and political considerations. Bear spoke up, his voice filled with anger. How many innocent people are sitting in prison right now because of these criminals? We estimate at least 50 people are currently incarcerated based on tainted prosecutions, Agent Johnson replied. But the number of people who were affected, families destroyed, careers ruined, lives derailed, is much higher. Marcus looked around the room at the diverse group of people who had come together because of his case. It's hard to believe that my sister getting harassed at her job led to exposing all of this. Agent Johnson nodded. Sometimes the smallest act of injustice reveals much larger problems. Your case wasn't unique, Mr. Rodriguez. It was just the one that finally got noticed by people who were willing to fight back. Patricia stood up, her decision clearly made. This just reinforces why our foundation is so important. Ms. Williams, we need someone who understands how to fight this system and win. Will you consider our offer? Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people from completely different backgrounds who had been brought together by a shared commitment to justice. Patricia Morrison, the judge's wife who had risked everything to tell the truth. Rosa Rodriguez, the young college student who refused to let her family be victimized. Marcus Rodriguez, the Hells Angels member who had shown that protecting family was more important than personal safety. Bear Thompson, the motorcycle club president who had demonstrated that loyalty and honor weren't limited to any particular social class. "Yes," Sarah said finally, "I'll do it. But I have one condition." Everyone in the room looked at her expectantly. "We don't just focus on overturning wrongful convictions. We also work to change the system that made this corruption possible in the first place. We fight for judicial reform, prosecution oversight, and better legal representation for people who can't afford it." Patricia smiled broadly. "Ms. Williams, I think you're going to discover that sometimes the most unlikely alliances create the most powerful forces for change." As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized that her life had been permanently altered by her decision to take Marcus's case seriously. What had started as a simple assault defense had evolved into a mission to reform an entire legal system. The foundation they were planning would face enormous challenges and powerful opponents, but Sarah was no longer intimidated by such obstacles. She had learned that justice was possible when people from different worlds came together and refused to accept corruption as inevitable. The shocking events that had begun with a black woman defending a Hells Angels member were about to transform into something much larger, a movement to ensure that the legal system served justice rather than privilege, truth rather than power. 1 year later, Sarah stood in front of the same courthouse where Marcus Rodriguez had once faced false charges. But everything had changed. The building now housed the offices of the Rodriguez Morrison Foundation for Legal Justice, and Sarah was preparing to address a crowd of reporters, legal professionals, and community members who had gathered to hear about their first year's accomplishments. The foundation's success had exceeded everyone's expectations. Working with the FBI's evidence and Patricia Morrison's financial backing, they had successfully overturned 23 wrongful convictions in their first year. More importantly, they had pushed through legislation requiring independent oversight of prosecutors' offices and mandatory body cameras for all police interrogations. As Sarah approached the podium, she could see familiar faces in the crowd. Marcus Rodriguez sat in the front row, now working as a community outreach coordinator for the foundation. Next to him was Rosa, who had changed her major to pre-law and was planning to join the foundation as an attorney after graduation. Bear Thompson and several Hells Angels members stood near the back, providing security for the event, a sight that had initially surprised people but had become normal over the past year. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, "1 year ago I thought I was simply defending a man who had been charged with assault after protecting his sister. I had no idea that case would expose the largest corruption scandal in our city's history and lead to the creation of this foundation." She gestured toward Patricia Morrison, who sat with other foundation board members. "This foundation exists because one woman had the courage to choose justice over family loyalty, truth over comfort. Patricia Morrison risked everything to ensure that an innocent man didn't go to prison, and her bravery inspired all of us to work for systemic change." The audience applauded as Patricia stood briefly, still clearly uncomfortable with public attention, but committed to the foundation's mission. Sarah continued, "But the real heroes are the families who trusted us to fight for them when everyone else had given up. People like Maria Chen, whose son David spent 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. When we first met Maria, she had lost her job, her home, and her faith in the legal system. Today, David is back in college, and Maria works with us to help other families navigate the appeals process." Sarah paused as she spotted Agent Johnson in the audience, who had become an unofficial advisor to the foundation. "We've learned that corruption in the legal system isn't just about individual bad actors. It's about a culture that values conviction rates over truth, that assumes guilt based on appearance or background, and that allows power and privilege to determine who receives justice." Marcus stepped up to the microphone next, still somewhat nervous about public speaking, but determined to share his perspective. "A year ago, I was just a guy trying to protect his sister from harassment. I never thought about legal reform or systemic justice, but this experience taught me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never chose to fight." He looked toward the Hells Angels members in the back of the room. My club brothers taught me about loyalty and protecting your family. This foundation taught me that your family can include people you never expected. People from different backgrounds, different cultures, different worlds who share your commitment to doing what's right. Rosa took the microphone next. Her confidence a stark contrast to the frightened young woman who had been harassed at Murphy's bar. I used to think that justice was something that happened to other people, something I couldn't influence or control. But watching my brother's case unfold, seeing how one attorney's determination could expose corruption that had destroyed so many lives, that showed me that each of us has the power to make a difference. She gestured toward Patricia Morrison. Mrs. Morrison and I have become friends over this past year, which would have seemed impossible when this all started. But we learned that justice doesn't recognize social boundaries. It requires people from all backgrounds to work together. Patricia finally approached the microphone, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. I spent 20 years watching my husband abuse his power, and I told myself there was nothing I could do about it. I was wrong. There's always something you can do. You just have to be willing to pay the price for doing what's right. She looked directly at Sarah. When I first walked into Ms. Williams' office, I was terrified. I knew that exposing my family's corruption would destroy my marriage, alienate my son, and change my entire life. But I also knew that staying silent would make me complicit in sending innocent people to prison. Patricia's voice grew stronger as she continued. This foundation represents the idea that courage is contagious. When one person stands up for justice, it inspires others to do the same. Ms. Williams's refusal to accept an easy plea deal for Marcus inspired me to come forward. My decision to expose the corruption inspired other families to seek help. Together, we've created something bigger than any of us could have accomplished alone. As the formal presentations concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed. She had gone from being a public defender handling routine cases to directing a foundation that was becoming a model for legal reform across the country. Bear Thompson approached her as the crowd began to disperse. Ms. Williams, I wanted you to know that your work with Marcus changed how a lot of people in my community think about the legal system. We always assumed that attorneys and cops were automatically against us, but you showed us that there are people in the system who will fight for what's right. Sarah smiled. I learned just as much from your community. Bear, the loyalty and protection that Hell's Angels provide for each other, that's exactly what the legal system should provide for everyone. Marcus joined their conversation, accompanied by Rosa and Patricia. Ms. Williams, Marcus said, there's something we've been wanting to ask you. The foundation has been so successful that we're getting requests from other cities to help them set up similar programs. Would you be interested in expanding nationally? Sarah looked around at the group of people who had become her closest friends and collaborators over the past year. A year ago, they had been strangers from completely different worlds. Now they were united by a shared commitment to justice that had already changed hundreds of lives. I think the Rodriguez-Morrison Foundation is just getting started, Sarah replied. If we can create this kind of change in one city, imagine what we could accomplish nationally. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. The corruption we exposed here isn't unique to Detroit. There are communities across the country where people are being failed by legal systems that serve power instead of justice. Rosa added, and there are probably people in every city who are willing to fight for change if they just have the right support and resources. As the group made plans for expanding their work, Sarah marveled at the unexpected journey that had brought them together. A simple case of a man protecting his sister had revealed corruption, exposed conspiracies, and created a movement for legal reform that was already spreading to other cities. The story that had begun with a black woman defending a Hells Angels member had become something much larger, proof that justice could emerge from the most unlikely alliances, that courage could be contagious, and that sometimes the most important changes in society began with one person's willingness to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Marcus's case had ended, but the movement it had inspired was just beginning. Sarah Williams, Patricia Morrison, Marcus Rodriguez, Rosa Rodriguez, and even Bear Thompson had discovered that when people from different worlds unite around shared principles, they can accomplish things that none of them could have achieved alone. The shocking events that had unfolded over the past year proved that justice wasn't just about courtrooms. and legal procedures. It was about human beings choosing to stand up for each other, regardless of their differences, and refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. As Sarah locked the Foundation's office that evening, she smiled at the simple plaque on the door. Rodriguez Morrison Foundation for Legal Justice, where courage creates change. It perfectly captured what they had learned, that real change happened when ordinary people decided to do extraordinary things, and that the most powerful force for justice was simply people caring enough about each other to fight for what was right.